Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Boring Show. My name is Fitz, and I have a special guest here with me. This is Frank. Hello, Frank. Introduce yourself momentarily.
So you introduce yourself as Fitz, and then you introduce me as Frank? Is that how we're going to be?
I guess that's how we're going to be.
That's awesome.
Frank is also known as Puff, so that's our introductions. Puff, where do you come from?
I am dialing in from San Francisco, which is where I live. And if it's very noisy outside, it's because I live in the middle of the city, just so you know.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm in Google on Firebase. I do Firebase and Flutter work. And I'm either known because I do a lot of events or because I answer a lot of questions on, if you recognize the logo, on Stack Overflow, which is also my water bottle for today, by the way, just so you know. So if you see me sipping from the bottle, it's water. But this is the Boring Show, right? So I just put up a screen with a Google search because that's what we're going to be talking about today, or not?
Yeah. So I think given Puff's background in Firebase, we had a couple of Firebase things to talk about. And you said you had a Dart pad as well with some code that we should look at. Do you want to pull that up and maybe let's start and let's talk about some context of what the issue is we're looking at and where to go?
Yeah, give me 1 second for a moment here. I need to move something around a bit. I realize now that we're blocking something. There we are. Now we can see a bit more. Okay, let me share my screen. So you should now all be seeing my screen. And like I said, it's going to be boring. So this is the Google search screen. I swear, before it wished me a Happy New Year, but now it doesn't. And let me actually tell you a bit about what I do and what I want to talk about with you today, Fitz. So as I said, I am active on Stack Overflow, and this is me on Stack Overflow. And Firebase people might know that I was actually hired because I was answering questions about Firebase on Stack Overflow already. So I keep doing that, and I do that every day, and I love helping developers use Firebase. And these are some of my top answers, but if you look at some of my newest things, then you can see that I've been active today. Not as much as I usually am, to be honest, in a large part because I was preparing for this recording. I answer a lot of questions there. And in recent years, of course, we've seen a lot more Flutter questions with Firebase also. I look at all the Firebase tags, and then I noticed that people were asking about Flutter. And that's mostly how I learned Flutter, right? People have a lot of questions about it, and nobody knows the answer. Then I love figuring out the answer. One of the things I noticed a lot in the last 9 months or so is people who were using Firebase Authentication, and they were asking how to deal with errors, authentication errors. So things like that email address already exists, or the user that is trying to sign in does not exist, right? That type of thing. So I started testing a bit with Flutter for that, and I used Dart pads because Dart pads, the online editor for Flutter code and Dart code, now supports Firebase. So what I want to do today is actually look at a Dart pad, I guess, and see what we can get working there. And I have some questions about some of the error handling there for you also, Fitz. So I'm hoping we can figure out how to do things better together.
Yeah, I can't promise answers, but hopefully we can have a good discussion at least, and maybe lean towards some answers eventually. It's a really cool thing that we've added recently is the ability to have a small specific set of packages available on Dartpad, and so a couple of the Firebase things are what we have here, and so we will look at this authentication issue. Okay.
I forgot to actually find some links for these issues, but they're all fairly similar because it is indeed not completely trivial. Definitely it wasn't for me because I'd never done error handling in Dart and Flutter before. So what I've done for today is I have a piece of starting code that I put in a gist. Let me open the gist here. So this is the gist with some starting code. Now what I'm going to do is because I'm not sure if everyone knows, but you can open this in Dartpads. by taking the gist ID, the last bit string in the URL, and then typing ID equals, and then the gist ID here, which is how most of the samples that we have for Dartpad actually work. So those are just gists on GitHub. Now we get this code. It's compiling at the moment, you can see, because the button was disabled. Oh, it was maybe doing something else. But now when we click run, this runs in my browser. Oh, and there it is. And we have a UI as I typically build them. So I apologize. The best I can say for it, that it's nicely blue.
Yes, it is the correct blue. It's certainly a nice blue.
Yeah, I think actually the background blue is this one, and this honestly is a color I select somewhere. Now, one of the fun things, we'll probably share this link in the description below also, right? But is that you can also just use this starting code and you can follow along. But I'll also show you the finished code in a moment and where we are stuck. But what I've done is just built the UI because I want to focus on Firebase today. So I did some elevated buttons. I left one call in there, see. But I want to quickly show you a few things that we have in here, which is, have you done Firebase with Flutter, Fitz?
I've done a very little bit. It's not something that I've spent a ton of time with, but I've looked at your code ahead of time, so I at least have some of that context.
Good. No, and that is important. I will talk people through it, of course. So what we do here is that we import two packages that are for Firebase. The first one is Firebase Core, and the other one is Firebase Auth. We're going to look at them both in the next minute or so, because this is the Firebase Core, is essentially this call, which is, right, this code, this import pulls the Firebase SDK into our Flutter application. And Firebase is a set of backend services, right? So we can sign in with Firebase. And that's what we're going to be doing today. That means that we don't need to spin up our own server. We can call the sign-in methods straight from our Flutter code, which is really good. But it does mean that the Flutter code needs to know something about our Firebase project, right? Firebase works with projects, and I have a project set up for this. And this is how I connect my Flutter code to the backend that I've created for this. We're not going to look at the backend because it's not all that interesting. Now you see some values here that you might think are very secret, but you also see that I didn't blur them out. And that's intentional.
That's going to be my question too. I was like, oh my gosh, an API key. I could steal Frank's project now.
Yeah, the big mistake we made was calling this an API key because everyone is confused about that. And that makes total sense. It's actually my top upvoted answer on Stack Overflow is that these are not secrets.
Right.
These are configuration data. So it's the same as, let's say that you would in your app, upload some code to GitHub or something through their API. No, they don't have a client-side API. Bad idea. Read something from the Google homepage, right? You would have to type google.com into your code, right? Because otherwise, how does your code know what URL to go to? These are the same for us. So you can see that the auth domain, just like what we use to sign in, is apparently nanochat.firebaseapp.com. And the project ID, which is my Firebase project, is also Firebase NanoChat. You might have gathered that I use this project a lot for chat apps. The API key is less readable, but it's the same logic. It's what we use for finding the authentication backends. So all of these essentially identify a single Firebase project that I have. This project is pretty well secured. For example, there's two databases here on this project. You won't be able to write anything that I don't want you to write there because I have set up security rules on my server for this. So it's a chat app. When we launched Firebase support in Dartpad, I created a tiny chat app, a NanoChat, and it has a very limited set of words that you can type because we want to make sure people are polite. So you can say hello world, Dartpad, Flutter, things like that, but almost nothing else. And that's all done server side with a simple, what I consider relatively simple configuration language. So you can't do a lot of damage there. Believe me, people try. So the important thing here is this is where we initialize Firebase, and you can see that these are not secrets because I've been showing them to you for ages. It's an asynchronous call because we need to call to the server here. But after that, we run my app, and that's where the real code starts. The important thing we do there is that I get a reference to Firebase Authentication, the service, as we call these things. so that I can start calling the APIs that we have on this. Now, all of these APIs are documented on firebase.flutter.dev. I have to think about that. But I don't think we're going to be actually looking at the documentation all that much. Depends. We'll see.
Right. We'll see. And I have a question so far, and maybe this is getting ahead of ourselves slightly, because I know this topic is going to come up later, or a similar topic. You're awaiting the Firebase.initialize as part of the run app, and I'm curious about that, and I wonder if you've seen any effect of like load times when the app first starts, if that await is causing that initial load to slow down at all, or and therefore do we have to await it there, or do we like I know we definitely want it to be available later, but I wonder if like we can.
No, you're completely right, and in fact, Sparky comes out and yells at me because you caught my first lie. I realized it as I said it, that this does not call to the server. So while it is an asynchronous API, it's a local API. It just calls the native SDK under it, and that's why it's asynchronous. So Sparky is unhappy with me. I blame the mosquito that kept me up most of the night, by the way.
Fair enough.
But you are
when you
right.
Say that's, when you say that's a local API, then it's just like just setting up some internal structures and setting up some internal things.
Yeah, so it takes milliseconds, not hundreds of milliseconds. But if this is a concern, you definitely should be putting this in a future builder in your widgets, of course. That's what I think the documentation probably tells you to do, is my guess. I somehow do it here because I try to get this code out of my way as quickly as possible. And I don't build real applications. I don't care that it takes a moment before my UI shows.
Right.
But if you would put it in your build, in a future builder, you would see, you would say, something like loading Firebase, and you might see that flicker. Honestly, you probably don't, because it's going to be really fast. But good catch. Yeah, this is a local call, so definitely does not have any delay in it. Most of this code should mean more to most people than me. But I actually already created some Firebase handling code. So what you can see on the right here is that I have a ton of buttons and I have no current user, which is the sad trombone, right? Like we want to show a user. Yeah, thank you. I like that. Well, here are my buttons. You can see that I accidentally forgot to remove some codes that already calls the API. But if I call the sign out button, which we currently don't see, where are we? Okay, maybe I should start here. Sorry about that. Let's start with a stream builder. So the Firebase user is, Firebase automatically persists the user state to local storage in the browser or shared preferences on Android or whatever other mechanism you have. And when the app loads, it tries to restore that. And yeah, that operation takes time because that does require a call to the server. So that's why we expose it in a stream. And it's in this stream. So it's called auth state changes. So we also have auth.currentUser, which gives you the current user when you call it. But most often in UI, we want to actually listen to the changes in user state so that when Firebase is restoring the user state when the app starts, that you can say, logging in user or something like that, right? But that might fail, which is why it's a stream, right? Because we also need to handle the errors. And even after the user is signed in Firebase Authentication, you can disable a user account. And that means that it takes a while because Firebase uses tokens that are valid for an hour. But while the app is running, the user might be forcefully signed out, in which case auth state changes will fire again, will fire a new event on that stream. And you can respond to that and tell them to sign in again, which of course won't work if you disable their account. So lots of things are going on here. We see many developers, we see them dealing with current user and then wondering why it's null when the app starts. Well, this is the reason. Honestly, that one we can typically help people with quite well. So that was not my reason for building the Dart pad, although it was fun to do. I do show a UI when there is a user. So here you can see that I have a builder which listens to this stream, and then you see that we check auth.currentUser. And if that's not null, we show one UI, and somewhere below here, if it is null, we don't show anything. But we do show a user panel. That's actually what I wanted to show you. So that's just a custom widget I created to show some basic information about the user. So I'm not sure if this is how we're supposed to build custom widgets, because I'm not a Flutter expert. I'm a Firebase expert. But I like this way of isolating some functionality. So it's a simple stateless widget because it gets all its state from Firebase, which I love about using Firebase with Flutter. Firebase is often your state. So here, the state is the current user that I talked about before. And I just show you that there's either no current user, which is what we see on the right here, or I show some properties of that user, like whether it's an anonymous user, what provider data we have for the user, and some things like that.
Right, so this current user from the Firebase instance is populated as part of that stream?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So it shows the last value that we had on the stream.
Got it.
But that also is the reason
when that stream builder is ready to build, this user panel widget is just already going to have all that data and doesn't need to do anything special, just grabs it.
Exactly, yeah, it just checks the current user, and then either it shows like that there's no current user, or it shows data about the user. We do need to handle the null here because my app actually can sign the user out, but in many cases you will show a loading indicator, right? A spinning loading indicator or something like that. Quickly going back to the top. One of the things that I misunderstood about auth state changes for a long time. I've been on Firebase, I've been using it for 9 years? Something like that. Is that the first time this stream fires a value is after it has restored the initial state. So I always thought that it immediately fired with null here, but that's not what it does. So if the user was signed in before, it will actually, if it succeeds in restoring that, that's the first time it will fire. So
if you've not logged in before, it'll give you null because the initial state from the local is null.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, okay.
But if it has no knowledge locally, or it needs to restore that knowledge, then it may take some time before it shows you the UI. Yeah.
Right, got it.
Which is really awesome, by the way. It's, as often is the case in Firebase, I didn't know this because the SDK did the right thing. And so my code was simpler. I just didn't know why it was simpler. In this case, my code could have been simpler. Okay, you see we have a sign out button that doesn't show because I only show it when we're signed in. All right, so that's where it is. The auth.currentUser is not equals null. This is the UI that we show. Let me see if I can select it. When the user is signed in, and the rest of it is the UI that we currently see, which is when there's no user signed in. So if all is well, here's the first button we see, right? Sign in anonymously. I made that show a snack bar because I like showing snack bars. So let's see if it does that, actually. Yay, look at that.
Oh, signed in. Excellent.
I really love how complete Flutter in Dartpad is, right? This is just Flutter for web, I get that. But for me, it's just so cool that I can show snack bars in like a single URL like this, right? If any of you loads this same URL, you're going to see the same result.
So right now you're just having that say a message, but it's got a to-do on it, right? So is our goal here then to have that not be a to-do and actually log in?
Exactly, that's what we're going to do today, yeah. And I've done all of this before, so you might see me copy-pasting some things because I don't trust myself live writing a lot of Flutter code yet. But they are very small snippets normally. So this one I happen to know quite well, so let me see if I dare doing this. Because, let's remove the first one, which is signing in anonymously. So most often when you sign in users, when you think of signing in, it's where you enter your username, password, or where you select your Google account, right? Something like that. Mm-hmm. But actually, the most common is what many more classic web developers would call just a session ID. But in Firebase, we call that anonymous authentication. And it's we sign you in without any credentials, but we still give you an ID. I often joke that it's like, we don't know who you are, but we know that you are you.
So in that case, maybe this is a Firebase question rather than a Flutter question, but let's say I click on the sign in anonymously and I get that ID, and then I close the browser down and I reopen the Dartpad a day later, 2 days later, and I click the sign in anonymously button again. Do I get the same ID or is it a different one?
it depends. If we had recorded this 6 years ago, then you would have gotten a new ID. But luckily, since then we actually fixed it. We fixed it very quickly because we were generating a lot of new users. So no, you get the same ID indeed. So that same ID is also persisted locally in the local storage. And I must admit, I did not test this in Dartpad, so it's fun to try. But on like real apps where we have access, so that's the thing. I don't know if we have access to local storage fully in Dartpad because it runs in an iframe, which is one of the reasons. For example, you can see that I have signed in with Google and signed in with phone number here. I've been trying to get those to work, but can't because we run in this restricted sandbox. So it's actually something I want to continue to look at if I can do this with a pop-up or something like that. But so far, not yet.
Got it.
Hold on, let me find, where's my anonymous sign in? Oh, let's see. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this scaffold messenger for now. So we have Firebase Auth here. The other thing I love about Dartpad is that it shows me autocomplete. Sorry for the slightly messed up autocomplete here, but luckily if I start typing, it's better. There's a good thing. Sign in anonymously is also alphabetically the first one. So we're going to use this one. This method. What you see is that this returns a future user credential. So it requires a call to the server. So it's asynchronous, hence it returns a future. And the thing it returns is called a Firebase user credential. We're not going to be looking at that too much in this call, that is. And I think that might be all we need. Let's run this. You click the run button. If you see that it refreshes and I'm not clicking the button, it's because I did Command Enter on my keyboard, just so you know. There's shortcut keys for this. Okay. Now let me see what happens when we click this. Do we want to do a drum roll here? It worked.
Oh my gosh.
I'm really happy with that. Like you said that we shouldn't prep too much, so I have no idea if things completely work. What happened here, Fitz? Do you see what changed?
Well, so we got our user is not null UI instead.
Exactly.
So that is that our user panel widget showing up?
There's two things indeed that changed here. Both, we now see these first two buttons instead of the other buttons that we had before, because we have a user is signed in, so we see sign out and delete current user. And if we look at the rest of the screen is indeed the user panel widget. So the first line shows us the user ID, which in Firebase terms is called UID. And that's this value. So we're user Z8BW, things like that. This too is not a secret, by the way. It's a question we also get, is this a shared secret? And it's not. It's the same as any other user ID that you have. So to give you an idea, I answer this question on Stack Overflow regularly, and then I tell people that my user ID on Stack Overflow is 209103. Good luck trying to impersonate me, right? Because you need credentials to impersonate a person. So you also see that there is a property whether this user is anonymous, and if all is well, that shows true. Yeah. And later, if we sign in with an email password, then that is not an anonymous user. We show the user's email, which is probably null. Yeah, like it's not a verified email, all kinds of stuff. And then you see this blob here at the bottom, which is...
Is that just the full user object then?
Yeah, it's either the provider data or the user to string. This is the user to string probably. Like I was debugging. As I said, I use this to figure out how things work.
So if we signed out and signed back in,
that's a fun test, right? Will we be the same user?
Will we be the same?
By the way, did you notice the last two characters here?
42?
Is that insane or what? That we get 42 as the last two? Let's see if we get the same one. I know the answer, by the way. What do you think will happen?
I suspect we're going to get a different one.
And why is that? It's the correct answer, by the way.
I suspect because of the reason you said earlier, running in an iframe, and when we're trying to rebuild this, we're going to probably get a new instance of our local storage.
Yeah, there's two things actually that might be causing this. One of them guarantees it. That's why I know. So we might test both. When you sign out, that's an explicit signal that you want to get rid of this anonymous user.
I see.
So that's the guarantee that will wipe the UID. In fact, it's one of the things. You can't ever get it back. So if you don't want your users to sign in and you use anonymous users to add items to a shopping cart for them, don't allow them to sign out, because that
Interesting.
UID will be gone.
So in this case then, since we signed in with an anonymous user, are these two buttons the same? Do they have the same effect?
They probably do. We should test that. That's a really good one. They probably do. So we now have 3 test cases. I realize. That's fun.
Well, like I said at the beginning, plenty of questions and plenty of discussions.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Few answers.
So I'm not sure if my code is going to be set. So I want to first reload the window, because that's the least destructive action
Right.
to see if we get this user back.
Ah, yes.
So I'm not sure if this saves my Dartpad state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything here and copy that to my clipboard, just to be sure that I can easily get back to where we were.
Yep.
I think it may, it just doesn't always.
Right.
And I'm in an incognito window, which makes me uncertain. Okay, we're going to hit reload. Remember, Z8, blah, 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 42.
42.
It did not auto restart the app, but that's fine. No, so no current user. So that did not, oh, hold on. Did it restore my code, actually?
Look for that
Where were
scaffold.
we? Yeah, it does have
Okay,
this.
yeah.
Yep. So it did not restore it, which is this context only. If you build it might even work if you're not in an incognito window. I don't know. Worth testing on your own. But if you run this in a regular web app, it will store this. And if not, then ask questions about it, because you can configure the persistence, and it might not be configured correctly in your environment. For example, we see this a lot on things like Ionic, right, which runs in a restricted web browser environment, so always tricky. We don't normally see this on Flutter, which is one of the things I love.
So now if you click on sign in anonymously, we would expect this to be a different ID. Yep.
It is, yeah, it is. But again, it would if for example, if I can't sign in. Let's quickly hack this. Okay, 2 things happened here. It reloaded this iframe, and you can see that it restored the user state. Not sure if you noticed, but right, the entire UI was refreshed, and we still have the same UID that we had before. We can do that again, by the way, by simply hitting run again, and remember N11 and N2. It's the same user as before.
Okay.
I had to refresh it because I wanted to show the button. Hot reload works slightly different here than usually.
Right.
So what I did is add this button, because now we can sign in anonymously again. I have no idea what will happen, by the way. Because, so let's try.
Should it be? I would expect no difference.
I don't see any difference indeed. Now this is going to be interesting, because we have so little screen space here. I'm quickly showing. Oh, that is a bug that is somewhere else. Oh, you can see all kinds of layout issues. Essentially, what it's telling me is you need a bigger screen. I want to see what it logs, though, when I click sign in anonymously. Nothing, which probably means that it actually does sign in, by the way, which is
what if you look at the console in Dartpad? So in the bottom left, above your dev tools, there's a console button.
Good point. Oops.
And that's going to give you different information potentially.
Yeah, that's the fact that it's not, right, it's the layout issue we had, essentially.
Ah, yes. Okay.
How do I clear this one? Can I clear this one, Fitz? Do you know?
I don't think there's a clear button. But now that you have it open and scrolled all the way down, now click the sign in anonymously button.
Yeah, you see nothing happens.
Nothing
Which is why I'm going to add some print statements, by the way.
Okay.
Because I assume this does prints. So first, let's see if this actually does something. And of course, we're going to remove this in a bit, right? Just so you know, this is bad code, what we're doing.
Printf debugging, always its finest.
Yeah, this is one of the things I love about Dartpad, right? It's I don't want to have a real project for this, right? I just want a URL that I go to. Okay, so console was warning us about something in an import. We'll try to fix that in a moment. No worries about that. Now we hit, this is a weird thing I get, that we probably should get fixed. But okay, I did see that my console messages is going up. So my print is probably showing, is my guess. Yeah, see, that's awesome.
Cool.
That also means, by the way, that if my auth state changed because of that it would have shown that automatically. But just
this
to
would
be
be in the case that like the user credentials are revoked on the server or something like that.
Yeah, that's indeed could happen. I actually don't know if you can do that with an anonymous user, but with signed-in users, right, you identify them and you can block those users, right, if you have malicious users. We see, by the way, many developers deleting those users. Please don't, because then they can recreate their credentials. If you disable them, the account is still there and you've disabled the account. So I wanted to quickly make sure that this sign-in actually does something. So do you like async await or do you like then?
I tend to default to async await.
Which is totally fine. I'm just always a bit torn on where the async keyword goes. I think it goes here, right?
Every language puts a slightly different place, but yes, I believe so.
Okay, I am totally fine with that. Let is not a thing. Sorry, I've been doing too much JavaScript. Okay, and I'm not using user, which makes total sense because I actually want to print user here. That's all. Wow. Right. Did you see that? I have a block. We got a tiny pop-up for a calendar reminder here, which is, the block is that we're still recording. Okay. Refreshing UI. It
so
still
we're
restores
expecting
the
now
same user.
to see in the Dartpad console,
when I
once you click the button.
I expect it to first show this, then an asynchronous call happens, so it might take a moment. It won't take very long in this case. And then it will print the entire user. So that's pretty much going to be the same as we see here, is my guess.
Right.
I'm just trying to prove that we get to that point almost. Yep. Let's see if that happens.
Okay.
And it does. Look at that. Oh, well, It shows slightly different. It shows a user credential, which wraps a user, just so you know. So it's like it has two things. In a user credential, you can still get things like information about the Auth provider, if it's a social sign-in, things like that. But here you see the same user, which if you look at it, right, it has the same properties as we see here.
Yeah, display name null, email null, all that. Cool.
Okay, I'm going to remove this button because honestly, we have enough code to deal with. But I love that this works. Yes. We need to test sign out and delete, is what you said. Hold on. Well, I'm still going to remove that. Oh, yeah. Not sure what I did there, but it didn't like it.
I think for sake of time, let's assume we don't have to test the sign out and delete today.
Okay, totally fine. They are going to be like functionally the same, by the way.
Right. Because as you said, sign out as an artifact of the anonymous user removes the user.
So we delete the user, which means that we're back at not signed in.
Cool.
And when we sign out, it does the same thing.
Yeah, so now we have
by
a
the way,
totally different ID.
Yep, I love the reactive UI, by the way. I really love that. And in a large part, right, that happens because we were listening with a stream builder to auth.auth state changes. Right? It fires every time with a user. In this case, actually does it? I think it's a current user, but we always can get it from auth.currentUser also, which is what I do in most cases.
Right. So does that auth object also have the user credential that we were seeing earlier?
No, it won't. So if you need that, you actually need to capture it when you sign in, when you explicitly call the sign in.
Okay.
The reason is that the restore does not get. Sorry about that. The restore does not get the same credentials.
I see. Okay, that makes.
Yeah, it's very interesting how that works. So there's certain things that you must get at the moment of sign-in, and that's the only moment that I typically await a sign-in, which is a nice segue to the actual problem we're looking at. Okay, anonymous sign-in is very basic. Not a lot that can go wrong there. The next one for me is actually signing in with an email and a password.
This is where we're kind of getting into. I guess the question at hand, what if the email is wrong or the password is wrong?
Yeah. Oh, I haven't even tested those because I've hard-coded all my values, but we can try that. I'm actually first going to implement sign-in with email password, which right now is this, because it allows us to show you one type of error. So we're going to implement this to do. Now let me quickly see if I can find the code for that. There we are. Because this one is a bit trickier. So I'm going to copy-paste it from somewhere. But I promise, you see all the code And honestly, it's the minimum you can do for this anyway. Yes.
So this looks like a pretty simple call then. It's just sign in with email and password, and you give it an email and a password.
Yep. What you see, though, is that the password is shown as clear text, right? Just be aware of that. Where does my on-pressed end? There it is. Okay, got it.
So then to that question, is the auth package handling encrypting or obfuscating that when it tries to send it to the server?
It does it after on the server. This is also a common question, by the way, so great questions. So we send it on plain text, but don't worry, it's sent over a secure connection. It's over a TLS2 connection. So nobody can see it unless your credentials, your certificates have been hacked, in which case this is probably not your biggest problem. So, and the reason we do that, by the way, is that we hash it with certain algorithms that run much better on the server. This is also why I really don't like it when I see people building their own auth and storing passwords in our databases. It's like, please don't do that. Please don't store passwords, because we don't. I cannot tell you any password for any user. This value is never stored on Google servers, right? We store a hash of this and a salt of this, right? We have salted hashes with certain hashing algorithms that are allowed.
Yeah.
This value we do store, of course.
It may be obvious, but worth saying that this is a demo. The password here is a demonstration example user. Do not hard code passwords into source code for a production app.
And don't store them as plain text in your database.
Yes.
Honestly, use an auth provider like Firebase Authentication, but you can also use others. Like I'd rather have you use any other authentication provider than that you store passwords in a database. So. I'm quickly going to hit run because I didn't notice if it did. So this is it's still a sign-in call. You can see that. This is actually any sign-in. It's always auth.signin and then something. In this case, with email passwords. Well, I assume the UI refreshed.
It did. I saw it blink.
Yeah. So sign in anonymously still works, right? Nothing changed there. But now we can also sign in with email password, which will call this. Oh, that worked. Oh, I know why that worked.
This is a valid user that you created before?
Because I created it before, yeah. Let me fix that. What I expected was to get an error. So I'm going to delete the user and then try again. Yeah. And now nothing happened. See that? That's my guess is that we are getting an error, but that I'm not catching it. What happens to the error? This is, by the way, the problem people have, just so you know.
Yeah, so this is the interesting part of the episode where we're talking about the actual thing. Because I think, so right now your stream builder is set up to only give you a UI in the case that current user is either null or not null.
Yeah, exactly. Everything else needs to be handled in the on-pressed right now, right?
Yeah.
So my guess is that this method gives me an error, but we're not handling it.
And by that method giving you an error, do you mean the future is, or the thing underneath the future is throwing something potentially?
Yeah, let me quickly restart just so that we can see the signature. Here's the email and password. And you see that it returns a future user credential, which, right, when we saw it before for anonymous auth, it always works. But I have a feeling that it's failing here, except that it worked the first time because the user existed already.
Right.
So I want to handle this error, which I know a few ways of doing that. One of them is I love coding from autocomplete, just so you know, like catch error. And it's like, oh, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. Let's try it.
Let me quickly see what that will look like. So it gets an error, it says. So let's do this. And let's just print the error for now.
Again, this is not production code, so we can just print it out. It'll be fine.
I always love, by the way, that lots of autocomplete works, but semicolons are mine to add. It's like, I always love that in any IDE. It's like, sure. Like, okay. There it blinked. So when it blinks, I can click again. And yes, now we get an error.
So there's no user record with those credentials, with those IDs.
Yeah, that is awesome. I love
User
that.
may have been deleted. What? It's as if we clicked the delete user button.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, so it existed initially. I actually don't like seeing this here, so I'm going to show it in a snack bar. How does that sound? So I'm going to copy paste that from somewhere else just because I can. Well, actually, let me just grab this snack bar here.
Right, and then instead of the to-do text, do the error text.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, apparently I can't use tab to indent here. Whatever. Like this, and then we show, what did you say? There we are. Error dot. Oh, sorry.
Is there like an e.message or something we can put in there?
There's nothing here, so let's do a toString. It's actually a bit annoying. I saw that I can overwrite this. There were 2 catch errors I noticed. See, it has an overload that takes a test function. So I could catch just Firebase errors, which is actually what everyone wants to do. So I'm going to try that. Now, I'll admit that I made this work before, and I have like the code next to me because like it's a bit wonky to type, but I totally want to do this. Hold on. Let me see if I can make all the code fit. Also, I'm going to make this a bit like that so that we can see a bit more. Where's my catch error here? So the catch error has a second named argument, which is called test, it seems. And test gives me an error, and I want to handle the case where the error is a, that's not code. Is a Firebase Auth. I need to check what it's called. Hold on. Exception. Firebase Auth exception. Oh.
And so here you're effectively trying to do what would we call it? A checked exception?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it's only fire this catch on a certain type.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure, by the way, why it's now complaining about my. No. Where is it complaining? Hold on.
Evaluation of this expression throws an exception. I'm looking at the error messages on the right here.
Ooh. So can't that be allowed? What's that? That's interesting. So do I need to throw the exception? This, by the way, is very much where I was running into interest. Yeah, look at that. That's so interesting. Okay. Let's see what it does now before we try to figure out why it does that.
Yeah. We've written a bunch of code. Let's run it and see what happens.
Yeah. So remember.
Have you re-clicked run or command enter?
No, I did not. Thank you for that reminder. Oh, it's not happy with us somewhere. That's interesting, by the way. It's a compilation error that's not captured by the code analysis. It's not a constant expression. Oh, okay, that might be it. Hold on. This might be the problem. Unnecessary string interpolation. Oh, really?
Yeah, because when you're doing a toString into a string interpolation.
But wait.
So you could just do E there, and it should automatically do the toString.
I should now be getting a Firebase error. Why am I not seeing more Firebase exceptions? See, this is interesting. Because I think E should now be a Firebase exception. And okay, let's first just do E, in which case we also don't need curly braces. But let's check that in a moment, because I expect to be able to get the properties of Firebase exception. And I know that one has a code. It's the value we saw before.
Yeah.
Ignore this. We are using a version that is not too interesting. Actually, I think the console is going to be less interesting once we capture the error and show it in a
snack bar.
Like that.
Ooh, look at that. We're back. Sorry about those technical difficulties. But we're back. We're talking about, it's probably an instant for you. It was a few minutes for us. But we're talking about error handling here, and we've got this checked exception for only trying to catch the Firebase Auth exceptions. And Puff, where were we going with this next? We wanted to handle it properly, right?
We did, yeah. So remember, we were signing in with email and password, but the user doesn't exist yet, so we're getting an error, right? And initially we didn't know what happened because we didn't handle errors. Then we added a catch error, and we started showing it in the snack bar, which is awesome. But then we said, I only want to catch Firebase errors so that I can show the message. Right? That's where we sort of got disconnected. So I added this test clause to the catch error that we have here. I don't like trailing white space. And that made it that we had to throw the error because otherwise it got angry with us. I still don't fully understand why, by the way, but we'll see if we can clean that up a bit. But now my error in here should be a Firebase Auth exception as far as I know. So what we were trying to do is actually display the properties of that. And I happen to know that an error, let's run it again, just so that we are on the same spot. Okay, you can see that it's compiling because the button is disabled. And then if we click sign in with email and password, we see this blob of text here. And that first bit is the error code, as far as I know. And I think the second bit is called message. I'm not sure of the second bit. I do know that the first one is called code. So I think we could just display e.code, for example, here.
And then it'll
run.
Just give us the number of the error message.
Yeah,
right?
that weird thing in square brackets. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the thing in square brackets, so it's called user not found or something like that.
Right. Okay. Yep.
See, that's it, which is perfect. Now, that's not what we want to show, but I'm not sure if the other one is called message. Let me quickly check. I think it is. Well, autocomplete seems to be fine with that. So let's run again.
Okay.
Now see,
there's no
that
record.
looks a lot better, right? So I sort of like this, but I have no idea why this is needed.
The throw E, yeah.
But I also hear that most people like async, right? Using async and await, like we did. Where did we do that? For the sign-in anonymous when we were making that one.
Yep.
So, as a final exercise, see if we can turn this into a async and await call.
Okay.
Or actually a try catch, maybe I should say.
Yeah, let's do that. So this works for handling the error, but it might be a little bit cleaner to do the try catch, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think most people prefer that, right? So let's do that like this. This is I have no idea when Dartpad doesn't want to indent my code for me, but that's okay. So and then we're gonna catch. How does a catch clause look? Do you remember? I think
So if you want to do a typed or the typed exception, then you can do. I have the code up in my next monitor, but if you do on Firebase Auth exception catch E, right? Yep, exactly like that.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not happy with that. A try black must be followed by a catch or finally clause, which is what we have.
Oh, and then
so what are we doing?
So then you need another catch after that to catch anything that's not the Firebase Auth exception.
Okay. So that's the same as we had initially, like that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still unhappy, but that might just be some other things. It doesn't like on. What am I doing wrong here? Am I in the wrong spot? That could be. Oh, yeah. See, I am one level indented too. That would explain.
Okay, that's looking a little bit better. And those are just empty block warnings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll get rid of those. Okay. So now I'm going to move this code into my Firebase handling, right?
Yes.
Like this.
Yep. And then we can remove that dot catch error, right?
Yep, exactly. That one can go away. This part only. Now it needs a semicolon. So that works. Now we of course need to do something here. So I'm also going to print the other exception.
Yeah, and this
I'm just not going to show it in the scaffold.
More or less the unknown exception case.
Yeah, I wonder why we can't just let that one slide out, by the way. I'm curious about that. Okay. Let's see what we get now. Yeah, and this is where I was stuck at some point, just so you know.
Script error.
I'll tell you because I know why this happens. I figured it out, but it took me a long time.
So
do you know why this
happens? Let's see if I can figure it out while we're looking at this. Well, if you go to the DevTools error console, I think that'll show the error, I believe.
Let's try that. I'm going to use the keyboard for now. Just
yeah.
Let me quickly restart the thing because there's just so much going on in. This is again a weird UI error that we get.
Yep.
We click the button. Something definitely is failing. You're right there. Oh, so the error is showing here.
Yeah. So it's like we're not actually. Oh, I know what the problem is. Do you know what the problem is? You asked me if I know what the problem is. Now I'm asking you.
I do.
Well,
yeah.
it's because that sign in with email and password call is a future. It's an async method, and so without that await before it, it's not able to be caught by this catch.
Exactly. Yeah, we need an await here because otherwise the runtime doesn't know to translate the future, the then and on catch or on error, whatever we had, into a proper exception, right? Into a try catch log.
Yep, and then
so that means that we need to mark the method as async.
Yep.
Now this is the part that bugged me the longest because I'm used to using await when I want to get the result. Here I actually don't need the result because my auth stream, right? My auth state changes stream already gets any state changes anyway. But I need the await anyway because otherwise the error handling doesn't work.
And I think that's where the dot catch chaining is a little bit better in some ways because then we don't need the await and then it's also still async. Right now we're essentially making it a blocking, which is
Yep. Yeah, this is what I noticed indeed, where I'm like, I don't like this style, but I normally am okay with async await, but it feels a bit leaky here to me. And here you see the error message, right, which is the exact code we had here. So I preferred the previous style we had with a catch error method, but both are totally fine, of course. So do what you want, right? And of course, if you are going to use the future that you get back from sign in with email and password, if you want to use your credentials, then you are more likely to use this one, right? If you are doing something like var credentials equals, right? Then the await is actually much more normal for me. I'm not using that variable.
Yeah.
Right, but for me, an await like this, I never sort of like because it feels like I'm looking for side effects of await, which is exactly what we are doing here.
Yeah. And for this reason, I do prefer the chaining a dot catch on it, but
yeah, I had some issues there also because there I didn't like that we had to throw the exception again.
Yeah,
right. It's that felt weird to me because I feel like I'm handling it, and I get again on the language level why we do that, but it still felt a bit weird. Either way, right? The question. Oh, I see I have an indentation mistake there. The question we get a lot is how to handle errors, auth errors from Firebase Authentication in your Flutter code. And yeah, this is the way to do that, right? We've shown two ways. One of them with try catch, and the other one is with a catch error clause added to the sign in.
Yep.
And now you can actually use, right? We show the message here, but you saw that we could also get the code. So you can do a switch case or if then else on all the error codes that are in the documentation. And you can show your own message because you can see that our messages are, in this case, English, but it depends on the environment you run on. But you typically might want to show your own error messages, and that's fine too.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Puff, for being on the Boring Show. And I'm sorry we had technical difficulties, but that's life. And I hope we're able to get you on the show at some point again in the future. Would be great. There's plenty more Firebase things to talk about. There's plenty more Firebase and Flutter things that we could talk about. And in the meantime, thank you for being on the show, and we'll see you all later.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and bye, everyone.